Inside a frozen headquarters, one man would gamble an entire army on a single sentence. 48 hours. That's all he claimed he needed to save thousands of surrounded soldiers from certain annihilation. The distance too far, the weather too brutal, the enemy too strong. Yet Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied Forces, would have to decide. Trust the Premier, condemn Bastogne. This is the story of the most dangerous 48 hours in military history. The silence in the headquarters was suffocating. December 19, 1944. Eisenhower stood frozen over the Ardennes map, his face carved from stone. The German counteroffensive had torn through Allied lines like a knife through flesh. Entire divisions gone. Swallowed by fog, snow, and steel. Bastogne was surrounded. Everyone in that room understood what that meant. Bastogne wasn't just a town. It was the road hub. The hinge, holding the entire Allied front together. If it fell, the Northern and Southern armies would split apart like a broken spine. The war in the West could collapse in days. The room held. Inside, the fate of thousands balanced on colored lines drawn across a map. Then George Patton spoke. "I can break the siege in 48 hours." The words landed like a grenade with the pin pulled. Several officers looked up slowly, gravity itself seeming to shift. Some thought he'd misspoken. 48 hours wasn't a timetable, it was insanity. Patton's. Between them, frozen roads, collapsing bridges, German armor, and the worst winter in decades. Eisenhower didn't look at Patton immediately. He kept studying the map as if the words were still hovering in the air behind him. "Repeat that," Eisenhower finally said. Patton didn't move. "I can pivot the Third Army north and reach Bastogne within 48 hours. A sound rippled through the room, quiet. Restrained, but unmistakable. Disbelief. Eisenhower turned slowly, studying Patton's face like a man studying a storm on the horizon, aware of its power, uncertain of its direction. "You're talking about a full directional pivot of your entire front," Eisenhower said. "In winter, with weather-grounding air support." Eisenhower paused. His next words were measured, deliberate. "And you're certain?" Patton allowed a thin smile. "Sir, I'm already moving." Classic Patton speed first. Permission second. The gamble was already rolling before the bet had been accepted. Eisenhower slowly removed his gloves and placed them on the table. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "If you fail, you risk losing your army." Patton's reply came without hesitation. "If we fail to move, we lose the war in the West." That ended the debate. Orders erupted in rapid succession. Trucks rerouted. Supply depots reassigned. Armored columns turned north in darkness and snow. The Third Army began pivoting like a colossal frozen wheel, grinding against the earth itself. When the doors finally closed, and only Eisenhower's inner circle remained, the confidence evaporated. For the first time that day, Eisenhower let the mask slip. What Patton just promised us is either our salvation or the most dangerous overreach of this campaign. General Walter Bedell Smith asked the question everyone feared to speak. "Do you believe he can actually do it, sir?" Eisenhower's eyes remained fixed on Bastogne. "I believe Patton will try, even if every law of war tells him not to." That night, sleep was impossible. Reports flooded in by the hour. German columns tightened the noose around Bastogne. Inside the town, the 101st Airborne was already rationing. Ammunition. Medics cut bandages into smaller strips. Food and morphine vanished at a pace no supply system could match. Snow fell without mercy. The Germans believed they'd won a perfect trap. By the early hours of December 20th, Eisenhower gathered his senior planners again. Weather updates pinned across the wall like death notices. Thick fog still smothered the Ardennes. Allied aircraft, normally the hammer of the battlefield, were useless, grounded. Assume Patton is delayed, Eisenhower said. What happens? Silence. Finally, one officer spoke. Then Bastogne falls. Eisenhower nodded once. And if Bastogne falls? No one answered. They all knew. If Bastogne fell, the German offensive wouldn't just. Aircraft normally, the hammer of the battlefield, were useless, grounded. Assume Patton is delayed, Eisenhower said. What happens? Silence. Finally, one officer spoke. Then Bastogne falls. Eisenhower nodded once. And if Bastogne falls? No one answered. They all knew. If Bastogne fell, the German offensive wouldn't just continue, it would accelerate. The roads would be theirs. The initiative would be theirs. The psychological shock alone could tear through Allied morale faster than tanks through snow. Deep in the frozen countryside, Patton's army fought the land almost as much as the enemy. Vehicles skidded into ditches. Engines froze solid overnight. Columns stretched for miles along narrow roads never meant for such traffic. Officers stood in snow up to their knees, shouting directions into howling wind. Speed remained Patton's obsession. Move or die, he told his commanders. At headquarters, Eisenhower followed the movement with cold precision. Lines crept northward by inches on the map. Progress was being made, but not at the pace Patton had promised. By the night of December 21st, Eisenhower realized what Patton couldn't yet admit. The timetable was slipping. The Germans were tightening the ring around Bastogne faster than Patton could reach it. Every hour mattered now. Every mile gained or lost on frozen roads meant lives, thousands of them. Inside Bastogne, defenders waited in the dark. Snow covered the dead. German loudspeakers called for surrender. American paratroopers answered with gunfire and silence. Then, on December 22nd, the German demand came formally: surrender or face annihilation. Inside the frozen perimeter, the response was immediate. Not with words, but with a single word that echoed across history: nuts. The refusal carried weight far beyond defiance. It meant time, not diplomacy, would settle this. Every additional hour of resistance bought Patton another precious mile. By December 23rd, something shifted literally. Cloud cover began to thin. Patches of pale winter sky broke through the ceiling that had dominated the Ardennes for nearly a week. For Eisenhower, this meant everything. Allied air power, the one advantage the Germans couldn't counter, was back. Fighter bombers launched almost immediately. Supply aircraft prepared for drops over Bastogne. For the first time since the siege began, relief could fall from above. Colored parachutes scattered across snow-covered fields. Ammunition, food, medical supplies, blood plasma. For the defenders, it was proof they weren't abandoned. For the Germans, it was the first visible sign that time was no longer on their side. But air power couldn't break a siege built on armor and infantry. The decisive blow still had to come from the ground. It still depended on Patton. December 26, 1944. Patton's armored spearheads smashed through the southernmost defensive belt in savage close-quarters fighting. Tanks advanced nose-to-nose through snow-packed streets. Infantry pushed through ditches under machine gun fire. German resistance intensified as the truth became inescapable. The relief force wasn't slowing. Then it happened. Patton's vanguard broke through to the outskirts of Bastogne and made contact with elements of the 101st Airborne pushing outward. A narrow corridor was cut through the German encirclement. Fragile, heavily contested, vulnerable to counterattack. But real, Bastogne was no longer completely surrounded. Eisenhower received confirmation with calculated restraint. This wasn't victory yet, it was survival. But the destruction of the German timetable had been achieved. German counterattacks came immediately, violent and desperate. Their objective shifted from holding Bastogne to sealing the breach. Panzer units struck repeatedly, trying to cut Patton's columns away from the town. Some attacks nearly succeeded. Combat raged without pause. Tanks burned in snow-covered fields. Meanwhile, inside Bastogne, supplies began flowing through the fragile opening. Wounded, evacuated, ammunition replenished, reinforcements arrived. What had been a besieged fortress became a forward base of counteroffensive operations. The promise of 48 hours hadn't been fulfilled in exact measure. It had taken longer, much longer, but its strategic effect was achieved. Patton had arrived in time to prevent collapse. In doing so, he altered the entire trajectory of the German winter offensive. The relief of Bastogne marked the point where the German Ardennes offensive lost its strategic momentum. Within weeks, the Bulge would be erased entirely. Germany would never again attempt a large-scale offensive in the West. History doesn't judge commanders by the elegance of their timelines. It judges them by consequence. Bastogne endured because time broke in the Allies' favor. Patton delivered because momentum overcame winter. And Eisenhower's greatest achievement wasn't ordering the maneuver, it was allowing it. The war in the West turned on that decision. And with it, the fate of Europe began its irreversible slide toward Allied victory. The gamble that shouldn't have worked did. Against impossible odds, brutal winter, and an enemy determined to crush them, Patton's Third Army completed one of the most audacious military maneuvers in history. Bastogne held. The siege broke. The German offensive collapsed. But this victory came at a razor's edge. A mere difference of hours could have changed everything. Sometimes in war, the boldest move isn't the smartest one. It's just the only one left. This was Bastogne, where 48 hours became eternity, and one promise changed the course of World War II forever.